Mais um minuto. Já começamos. Estás a gravar? Ok. Pronto. Boa tarde a todos. Ok. Aqui, não é? Boa tarde a todos. Obrigado por virem a mais um Meetup da Power Platform Portugal. Estamos no Meetup 8 e este é um Meetup um bocadinho especial porque temos uma convidada especial que é a Natalie Pienkowska. Close enough. Que é Program Manager da área de Connectors, Independent Connectors da Microsoft. Veio-nos cá fazer uma visita, teve cá um mês a trabalhar diretamente cá do Porto e, portanto, aproveitamos a vinda dela para ela vir cá. A nossa agenda para hoje, não vamos ter grandes notícias hoje, portanto, essas coisas tipicamente nós deixamos para o Rodrigo Umbelino fazer, portanto, o Rodrigo e o Miguel são ávidos experientes nisto. Mas vamos ter aqui a sessão mais da Natalie. No final, depois, obviamente, temos algumas perguntas e questões que vocês podem colocar, se assim o entender. Um ponto importante, para quem nos conhece, nós já estamos nisto quase todas as sessões, mas a malta da Microsoft, mais a malta da Expand, da Shift, da Armis, eu próprio da DevScope. Hoje, com aqui em particularidade, estamos a fazer também a sessão não só do online, mas também dos escritórios do Porto, da DevScope. E para quem ainda não nos conhece, nós temos o nosso Meetup que podem seguir. Temos o nosso LinkedIn do Power Platform Portugal, temos o nosso GitHub com algumas soluções que vão saindo das nossas sessões e, acima de tudo, temos o nosso canal de YouTube onde vão sendo apresentadas as sessões de Power Platform dos nossos meetups. Finalmente, e aproveito, temos um grupo de WhatsApp para quem quiser tirar dúvidas, sugestões ou quiser eventualmente até fazer uma sessão, depois pode-nos contactar via WhatsApp ou também pode-nos enviar um e-mail para nós podermos candidatar a vossa sessão para um evento. Portanto, dito isto, vou dar aqui a palavra à Natalie. Natalie, thank you very much for coming and the word is yours.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me in Portugal. I've been here since November 1st, and I love this country. So I've been having a great time here, and I'm leaving on Friday. But this is like a nice end to my trip to be here with all of you. So thanks again for joining, whether you're joining online or here in person with me. So again, as I was introduced, I am a program manager on the Power Platform Connectors team. We also call our team Eco Integrations, but essentially, of course, these connectors on Power Apps, Power Automate, and in Azure Logic Apps, right? So even beyond the Power Platform. So
tudo bem?
I always like to start my session with a discussion that you all talking nice and early, instead of waiting till the last minute. Then we'll go over just like what our team is focusing on, latest improvements we have. We'll go over the connector certification processes, right? That's where a majority of our connectors are coming from, as well as some recent updates, especially in terms of custom connector development. So you see code and custom connectors, which is in public preview, which you may or may not have heard of yet. The fact that we're supporting Postman v2, and a lot of other things, including application lifecycle management improvement. So, and you'll get to see the roadmap, which is pretty exciting. So questions on connectors. Anyone can just answer any of these questions. I think that'd be great. This is also an opportunity for you to just share feedback on some connectors in general, especially if there are some that need more functionality, need more actions or triggers, or some that you're having a lot of difficulties with. So who wants to go first? Go ahead. What about them? Do you need a new one or? And what about them? Do you have any functionality specific requests? A DAX query. Got it. Okay. Got it. With DAX query. Yep. All right, that's the net new one. Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else?
Like if you have different servers or different equal database, but you want in runtime to set up which kind of configuration you want, it's not supported in most of the connectors. So dynamic configuration, it's a nice feature to have.
SQL. Like to see them. Okay. Right. Right. Right, but it's better to have it as part of the connector. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Anybody else? Let's get a third person. Who's brave enough today? Who has a connector complaint? Or any connectors that you'd like to see? Like new ones on the platform? SAP SuccessFactors? All right. Are there any specific things? I was literally looking at the API today. Are there any specific things that you want it to do?
Overall, not specific functionality. I think for enterprise customers, for a lot of HR use cases, I think having a native success factors connector would be a big plus instead of having to create a custom connector. But yeah, I think overall, only having like as a baseline first version of a success factors connector would be interesting. We're trying. Yeah, yeah, we're trying. Yeah, but I think I've heard of some implementations, but some effort in doing that. So
Speaking of SAP, so you've probably heard of the Clear software acquisition that our team had. So that will open and enable a lot of connectivity with SAP and Oracle. So hopefully, especially now that we've officially acquired, probably in the next couple of months, you can expect some development there. Yeah. So we won't be building from scratch. We use acquisition for that. Anybody else? Anything to do with connectors? Complaints, questions? All right. On. So again, our team manages our platform connector ecosystem, which accounts for over 580 connectors. We're almost at 600. I think by the time we get to 2 weeks from now, we'll be at 600. So it'll be pretty awesome. Got to get to 1,000, right? We're super behind Zapier. Zapier's at 3,000. So we'll get there soon. But some of these connectors are built by Microsoft to Microsoft services, right? Excel, Office 365, Outlook, SQL, and to non-Microsoft services, right? So Salesforce is a big one. ServiceNow is another one that we're seeing a lot of requests for. And then you also have the connectors that are built by API owners, right? So this is, for example, 10 to 8 limited for 10 to 8 appointment scheduling, right? And I know that DevScope has built one. It's been published, the robots for Power BI. So that's another example of that. And then the Independent Publisher Connector Program, which you've probably heard here and there just a little bit, right? But this basically solves the problem of, okay, I'm not an API owner and I'm not Microsoft. How do I develop and publish something to the Power Platform, right? So this was a specific ask from MVPs. So we developed the program and it's thriving. We have 42 connectors so far and about 20 in the pipeline. So we'll talk about that a bit later. And then obviously anything to do with custom connector development, right? So whether it's application lifecycle management or anything in that space, we own that. We also own connections as well. So, you know, any of those questions or any of those topics ring a bell, you can always contact me either, you know, today or any other time. You know my name now. So you can stalk me on LinkedIn and ping me whenever you need me. Great, so latest improvements. So we talked about the Independent Publisher Connector Program, which allows anyone to connector. That launched in July of 2021, right? So super recent, it's been about 4 months. And yeah, we're excited to see more development in this space next year. Also improved custom connector experience, I mentioned custom code, there's Postman v2, and the GitHub integration, which allows you to take connectors from our GitHub repository them into product super seamlessly and easily. Also, connectivity platforms, data and private preview and VNet gateway. I'll talk about that. And then new and improved connectors, right? So in general, we've had over 100 new connectors this year, over 100 new connectors, connectors, existing ones that have been updated. So that's also a big one. We're seeing a lot of connectors just constantly keep getting updated month to month, which is a good thing. That means people like partners are listening to customer feedback and they're incorporating that as part of their connector. And just some other work that we're working on, especially with the Outlook connectors. Cool. So we'll start with talking about opportunities. The question that you should always ask yourself is, do I own or work for a company that owns the backend service of my custom connector? The answer is yes. Let's say like Elon Musk, right, wants to submit Tesla connector, would go through the API owner program, right? So that requires a form, and then we do some extensive research to make sure that, okay, this company does exist, they do own the API, so on and so forth, and then that whole process kicks off. The connector is always open sourced, but there's also a certification portal. The other side is the Independent Publisher Connector Program. So let's say, you know, my name is Natalie, and I want to publish a Salesforce Connector program. I would go over, and for independent publishers, it's a lot simpler than for API owners, because there's less of that back and forth. Nothing to do with like legal stuff, because when you open source a connector, it just gets signed with an MIT license. So if you're super involved in open source communities, it's that simple, right? You sign the MIT open source license, and you're good to go. essentially, the program is ideal for any third-party services, so essentially non-Microsoft services, right? Because that's when it gets kind of tricky. But we've also seen students contribute to the platform, which is pretty awesome as well. We hosted a student ambassador hackathon back in September and got a couple of connectors and got people like learning about APIs. So there's a lot of really exciting events that we're seeing, even that we're not hosting, like those hackathons that I just described, where people are kind of just like, okay, let's come together, let's learn about APIs, let's learn about custom connectors, and let's publish it, right? It's really just following those steps. Why should you contribute? Like, why should you do any of this, right? Again, one of the main reasons is the collaboration aspect and creating one source of truth so that multiple people aren't building the connector. But the other main reasons, of course, are gaining visibility, right? And people do that very differently. And you can also see open source contribution, especially for Microsoft MVPs. But we see very different motivations. For one person, you'll see his name on the next slide, Troy Taylor. He's built almost 20 independent publisher connectors right now. And the reason why is because he wants to become an MVP. And he's using this as a way to kind of get that status and get accepted into the program, right? For others, there's one company in Australia who is starting to build out and submit a bunch of connectors to sustainability and climate change APIs because they want to be the #1 solution provider for sustainability and climate change, events and situations within the Power Platform in Australia. So you can see that there's very different motivations in terms of brand visibility or, independent as a person visibility. But yeah, essentially it is a full-on open source community and an open source contribution. We recently published a new benefit, achieving a Credly. I've seen Credly certificates. They look very similar to those that Microsoft gives out when you pass a certification exam. But yeah, we released 4. There's 3 independent publisher ones based on how many you've built, how much you've contributed, and then there's 1 project coordinator one. So for people who want to get extra involved and kind of making a lot of these decisions for growing and scaling the program, there's about 8 of us right now, and we meet every 2 weeks, and we do a lot of this thinking and talking of how we can add more benefits we can do to the program. So that's the 4th certificate that we have. And this is just the connectors that we have today, so it almost can't fit on the page anymore. I think I'll have to start using very small font. But you can just kind of see like the types of connectors that we have here. So there's like some HubSpot connectors, and HubSpot was a huge ask for a very long time. We also see a lot of weather connectors as well. There's AccuWeather, weather forecast. So it's interesting to see what people are using to build and learning to build from. There's also New York Times, and of course I'm pretty biased to New York Times because I'm from New York. But yeah, and then you also see a lot of interesting data sets that people are tuning into, like government data sets. So this one here, Libreboard, that's to the Spanish registry. And then there's also one to the to UK, I believe it's UK government bank holidays. And there's a couple, and the one to number 2 is the registries for Norway. So we're also seeing a lot of people kind of using government public APIs and building off of that. So yeah, it's pretty awesome to see that. And you can see Troy Taylor has built a lot. He's also built some cool ones like SpaceX and Launch Library 2. He's kind of started the trend to bring science type of APIs into our platform. So it's really interesting to see where people's minds are and what they're building and what they're thinking about, because it shows gaps on our platform. Cool, so let's go step by step, of course, high level on how to submit a custom connector to the program. So first things first, of course, you got to build one, right? If you've built one already, and I've seen a couple of people who are just like, yeah, I built my connector 2 years ago, I'm just going to publish it, right? And gain usage that way. But, the question I always start with is like, what product do you use often? For me, like it's Spotify, but someone already took the Spotify connector to build it. But I can always add more actions and functionality to that connector, right? We also have a list of top connector asks that I update weekly. So this basically, people come into our GitHub repository, ask, hey, I need this connector, or we look at the Power Automate forums as well. A lot of those connectors have already been fulfilled through this program, but those are just some of the other ones that are still there. Then, if you're new to building custom connectors and, you're mostly a flow or an app builder, I highly recommend taking a look at the learning module on the bottom right. It's super great, super simple to get started, and then you can build on top of like advanced features as well. Next thing is preparing your artifacts. So if you've built custom connectors before, you'll know that custom connectors are built up of 2 files, the Swagger file, which is OpenAPI 2.0, and the API properties file. And then of course you have to put in a README, and that goes into the documentation, both in the product and the public documentation. And then you have to use the PACon CLI tool to download the artifacts, add metadata. And then of course the best thing here, and especially through doing a lot of interviews with the independent publishers themselves, their best piece of advice is make sure you follow the documentation, because everything that you need is in there, especially for the independent publisher connector program. And then the next step is to submit to GitHub. So as I mentioned, everything is happening in GitHub. The whole certification process is in there. Essentially, it's super simple. You create your pull request, title it connector name. I've seen a lot of people who have never used GitHub before struggle, and sometimes they put in like all the files. But of course, we're there to kind of help, and especially when this comes along. And there's a lot of other independent publishers who also just take a look at the GitHub today and kind of help out as well. So we're all a community about helping. And then, we always ask for screenshots of proof that the connector actually like works, just so that it's easier then to continue the whole process. And you don't need to submit an icon. You might have seen this in especially Power Automate on the connectors page. They all have the same generic icon. And yeah, so you don't have to worry about that. But we are starting to think about, what can we do in the icon that wouldn't violate any legal issues? As a Spotify connector, we wish we could put the Spotify icon, but since it's not built by Spotify, we can't do that. So we're going to try to get creative to see what we can do to kind of differentiate a lot of these connectors, even if it means writing the title on the icon itself. Step 4, so this is the process that usually takes the longest, following through with comments during certification. So we have an incredible certification engineer named Shrikant, and he does all of the automated and manual validations. If you look in GitHub, we do have a Swagger validation that just automatically tells you what's wrong with your connector. Also, when you're in the PACon CLI tool, when you're preparing your artifacts, you see it there as well. So you kind of get a sense of if there are any issues throughout the process. But here we kind of validate it and test it out, make sure it's of a high quality, and provide updates along the way in GitHub. So you don't have to leave GitHub at all. All this is here. And then you can always submit an update anytime, and we will redeploy it. And the last step, of course, is to show off and support your connector, right? So we, right now, we're doing bi-monthly blogs where we feature folks. We also do a lot of shout outs and opportunities to demo and the PNP Microsoft Dev calls. I also have been doing a lot of YouTube recordings and interviews with publishers. I haven't published any of them yet, but there's a huge queue that you'll start seeing them next year, every week pretty much. So that's like a good way to learn about scenarios with the connector and get started. The new thing that I do want to announce, because this idea came from like the independent publisher community, but it's going to go way beyond that. We are going to start something called Power Platform Integration Labs. Lab stands for Learn, Ask, Build. And this is going to be a monthly meetup and call where we're going to talk about anything to do with integrations, right? And that's not just connectors. There's gateways. There's so many other topics that we feel, especially pro-dev topics that have not been covered in most community calls, at least back in the PNP program. And so we're trying to fill in that gap. So hope to see some of you there, just to stop by and not only learn about updates on independent publishers, but we're going to do deep dive technical sessions. Especially like one topic is triggers. We don't have too much documentation on triggers. There's not many connectors with triggers. That's because triggers are a little bit more difficult to implement. So that's one idea that we're going to have. And then, of course, supporting your connector by monitoring issues in GitHub. We haven't seen too many, which is good, and that's the whole reason why we take a little bit longer to make sure that we test everything out and that it works to prevent issues from happening, right? But of course, like with your name on it in the product, there is that, guarantee that you're kind of providing that support. And if you don't, the community provides it, and if not, then Microsoft provides it, right? So basically, you're guaranteed some kind of help. It might just not always be from independent publisher. But for now, we've seen it working super well. We've seen this model work completely fine, and we're not really worried about support. And I know that that's one reason why some people, think, should I adopt this at all? Should I use these? What if they break? but of course we still make sure that they're working, and if they're not working, we will take them down, just like any other connector. And what's next for this program? So today we don't have a lot of these things on the connector page, but 3 really big things is a review system. So if you see on the top right, just a rating system, 29 reviews, 4 stars, right? Giving people the ability, just like in any store, to kind of rate them one by one. Then we also have connector telemetry. So it's super small here. We have monthly active connections and monthly request counts, right? This kind of gives you it gives you confidence that, like, okay, this connector is being used, it's going well, right? It has a good rating. In addition to that, we want to improve the template submission process as well, so that we can have more templates, because of course templates are just so much easier to start out with instead of building a flow, especially if it's such a common scenario. So these are just the things that we are planning to do next for this program. And now I'll stop talking about the Independent Publisher Connector Program and go into other things that our team is working on. So again, I mentioned this before. So if you've built a custom connector before and you needed any transformation capabilities, you may have come across policy templates, right? I think we have around 10. Now, a lot of them are super limited. If the transformation capability that you need is not there, you're kind of stuck. And so a lot of people, what they were doing before is they were using Azure Functions and bringing that together with custom connectors. But now, instead of you having to worry about hosting the code yourself, we do have a new step in the custom connector creation process. Number 4, code, which is still in preview, allows you to upload your file or just paste it in. Going forward, we want to make sure we have more tracing capabilities, logging capabilities, and support for more languages. One of the biggest feedback we've heard is that C# is harder to learn than JavaScript, and more people use JavaScript. So we are considering that feedback heavily. But we do know that we just need to make sure that, we at least provide some kind of tracing and better error messages as well with this feature. The next one is support for Postman v2 and v2.1. Previously, we only supported Postman v1, and that was deprecated for a while. So now we have this. So this is just a significantly easier way to develop a connector if you've ever used this before. And then graph HTTP action, right? So this is basically the way that we're tying this to. Right now, it's just in the Office 365 Groups connector, right? But HTTP within Flow is a premium feature, and we've recognized that has that distinction. But especially for some of the standard connectors, we want to limit the HTTP request to that specific API behind that connector. So this is also just going to help, especially number 2, right? And number 1, expose the current functionality of the Graph API, but especially future expansions. And as I mentioned, it's a way to kind of get around the premium HTTP connector that we have today. So it'll basically be for each standard connector we're imagining to do this for, especially the Microsoft ones. But Office 365 Groups connector is the only one that has this today. And VNet gateway support for SQL Server and custom connectors is both in private preview. We still haven't made it to public preview yet. Of course, if you have the private preview tag, you may or may not have seen this. So here I just have the basic steps and some screenshots for do this. But I know that this was a huge ask that we've heard, especially from enterprise companies. So just wanted to share that this is available now, especially if your clients have been asking about this. And now we move on to ALM, so Application Lifecycle Management. So this is pretty much what our team has been working on super heavily, probably starting around September or October. And again, this is mainly for our enterprise customers, right? So Power Platform already has a decent application lifecycle management story, but custom connectors don't. So we're trying to just fit into that and not discount whatever Power Platform ALM story looks like, right? But of course, every ALM story contains governance, admins, which is probably the ones that we hear about from the most, right? The developer themselves, and then the tools, right? We want to make sure that the custom connector experience takes in all of those tools. So one of those features that we're working on is today, if you have a custom connector and you've already built it, you can't really put it into a solution. You have to build it into a solution, right? So now what we're doing is we're doing something seemingly small, but we are sure it's going to make an impact. So, you know, creating a custom connector, if you've created one in the past, and then being able to add it to a solution, right? So just making it much easier to bring everything into the solutions and making sure that it's working. The next one is, of course, I mentioned custom code. So this is definitely not solution aware today, and it's not ALM aware in any shape or form. So we do want to make sure we allow using GitHub for source control and just make this a significantly better developer experience in this space, because we've already seen a lot of customers using this feature, using code and deploying it and actually using it on a daily basis. But there's still, again, a lot of work we have to do to improve it, especially for developers. And last one that I really want to point out is especially environment variables. So we see this throughout our platform, but this is just a new way to kind of bring that into the custom connector experience, make things a lot easier for people so that they, you know, don't have to constantly rewrite everything, but it's also basically externalizing it out of the environment, right, across the tenant, being able to use different variables. So right now, custom connectors are super, super tied to their environment, and there's no negotiation there. So this is a great opportunity to kind of, you know, instead of having the developer update it everywhere, kind of use that same variable all across. So I'll just leave this up for a moment. This is our ALM roadmap. So I showed you 3 different things that we're working on with screenshots, but there's a lot more. One that we always hear about as well, which we haven't started working on, is service principal support for connectors, especially custom connectors. So that's a big one that we've heard. And yeah, there's a bunch of others here that hopefully will be helpful, especially with custom connector development. So just put this up for another 10 seconds just so you can all take a look. Okay. And what else are we working on besides ALM? So Snowflake Connector. That's we've heard a lot of clients. That's coming. Really soon. Working on it today. So you'll see that in the next 2 weeks, which is really good. We're really, really happy about that. It was a long time coming, and we know we have so many asks for it. So that's coming. SAP message server, there's a lot of SAP stuff as well. SSL support for PostgreSQL, support for service principals, and then more connectors in sovereign clouds. That doesn't really pertain here in Europe, but it's super important back in the US. And focusing on GA. So GA and custom code and the connector experience, but also GA-ing our connectors, right? There's a great majority of connectors today that are still in preview. And we hear that feedback a lot. Like, why are they still in preview, right? So we're doing a lot of work here to kind of, you know, prep them for GA and bring them to GA, just so that we can increase adoption and increase feedback coming in for those connectors. Future roadmap, so super vague, but, you know, improvements in enterprise connectivity. There's VNet here, SAP connectivity improvements, and system of records connectivity improvements, right, which will be driven a lot by the recent Clear Software acquisition. Cross-cloud parity, again, that's mainly for US situations, but also focus on GA, right? So, you know, the independent publisher connector program is relatively new. We want to make sure that we can GA it with having all the reviews and the telemetry in place, and a mature developer platform. OpenAPI 3.0 is also huge feedback that we hear day in and day out. So we do want to slowly start addressing that in the future. Yep. And that's all for me. So, thank you.
Então agora temos a oportunidade para questões. Pessoal que está online também, temos aqui 2 recursos especialíssimos, Rodrigo Umbelino e Miguel Oliveira, a receber as vossas perguntas, portanto estejam à vontade para perguntar. E creio que já temos algumas perguntas. Quem estiver aqui também pode levantar o dedo, passa o microfone e diga. Espera aí, eu vou-te passar o microfone.
So Natalie, there was a question from Philippa. She was asking if you could share the name of some of those connectors that you mentioned that were related to sustainability.
Sustainability, yes. Carbon. Oh yeah, sorry, I'll take this. Carbon intensity is one. And there's another one. We can literally open up GitHub and I can show you what's coming. But let me see if it's on this list. So Hassan, this is one. This was the first one that started it all. Oh, whoops. This is the first one that started it all. Number 13, Hassan Unlu, carbon intensity. And I think if you go into our GitHub, so I don't know if I can open that. I should be able to, right? Oh, so it won't show up if I click it?
You have to drag it.
Oh, that's fine. That's actually better because I have a bunch of tabs open. So, okay, and let me show you the PRs here. Did it work? Okay, I just need to sign in. Okay, so where's Paul? Paul Comsey, yes, somebody submitted a Star Wars connector. Open now. This is the other one. This is the one that he was talking about. So right now there's two, but Paul is the one who is looking to build a bunch of them to increase his brand's presence in the space. But you can also see, I guess it's an opportunity to see the other one. So we have Star Wars. We have this one, which I'm not sure what this is yet. It's an Airly one, right? Workspan. Yeah, that's just a highlight. Okay.
More questions?
Are there? I hope there are.
I can ask you that.
Yes.
There are a lot of connectors with deprecate actions. When they will be away?
Okay, great. Do you have a specific connector?
Well, you have the Outlooks and the email V1 and V2 and so on and so forth. But again,
Yeah, that's a good one. I think especially Office 365 Outlook is the one that we're seeing a lot of deprecated ones. Yeah, I mean, we're on like version 4 for some of them. Yeah, that's a good one. Usually once this is the procedure that I'll tell you. This is what we usually do. So we usually put it as deprecated for 6 months to give people time to start removing their flows, changing their flows, right? And then we disable and delete. So I think I can look more into that. It's good that you mentioned it. I can look more into that to see why it's taking particularly long for these, right? Maybe we're having, because Office 365 Outlook is such a hugely used connector that like we have to make sure that we migrate everyone over. So I think for that one, that might be the reason, but it's still worthwhile. It's good that you mentioned. I can definitely go check to see like at least what the timeline might be for that, so that at least we can share it with customers. Any other? Oh.
So I just want to know when is going to be available PowerFX here in Portugal. It's not about connectors, it's about PowerFX, but it's an important question for me because it will be really helpful for me having PowerFX with available.
Yeah, I know. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know, but follow me on LinkedIn and then I'll message you when I find out. And that goes for anything we talked about today. I mean, I definitely remembered the first 3 questions from earlier, but if there's anything else, like, you can ask me. I'm your person now. PowerFX is a good one. Actually, speaking of PowerFX, we were also thinking about how to implement, any of the Power Platform languages into the custom code experience for custom connectors. So, yep.
Open this.
Any other questions or feedback, online or in person?
In terms of the independent connectors, is there a review system that qualifies them in terms of licensing tier for standard or premium, or are they automatically a premium connector?
Great question. So I would say the short answer is they're automatically a premium connector. However, there are 5 that will be coming out as standard. Power BI Admin, which Azure AD Applications Manager. There is another Azure AD one, a Microsoft MVP connector, and Microsoft 365 Health. Those 5 will be produced as standard, but it's only those 5. And now I will explain why. So basically, when we started out the program, right, our goal was to mainly accept third-party connectors, right? So third parties, that's easy, right? Because that's always going to be premium. But when we started getting standard submissions, we realized, okay, people have different motivation for this program, right? And so we gave the exception for the first 5. But recently, we actually had another connector that should be standard based on our current licensing, but we made it premium, and that's a temporary premium, right? So I'll explain how the temporary premium works. Once we get the team who owns the API to help oversee that connector, why? Because they're the ones that are going to know when the API changes, then we can make it standard, right? So it always starts out as premium except for those 5, because that was in the beginning of the program, and we made those exceptions, but it will always be premium. So like the best advice there, and there's one person who's doing this right now, is he's going to build a connector, I don't remember what, to first party, and he's trying to get in touch with the team and the company that owns the API, of course through me, right? And once he gets like a vet from them, like, hey, can you help support this? Then deploy it as standard. We can't deploy it as standard because it's going to have so much usage. And if it's one independent publisher is taking care of it, it's going to fail, right? And so those 5 are going to be deployed as standard and co-supported by Microsoft, which is why they're standard, right? But it's super hard to do that. So just automatically assume that it should be premium unless there's a very, very specific exception. But we're trying to move away from that just so it's super easy. So you submit it, we deploy it as premium. Good question.
Natalie, what is other criteria to...
Oh, wait, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. What is other criteria to define a connector as standard or premium? Because there are connectors that are Microsoft related and are supported by Microsoft that are premium.
So this is I would say this is a very tough question just because I know 2 years ago we had the big licensing changes, 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. I don't remember. I wasn't here, so I don't know those decisions. It was October 2019. I see. Oh, so yeah, 2 years ago. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think something that I've been pushing our team to do is make the open definition because we don't have an official definition. I think that's the answer to your question. And then it causes a lot of confusion on why certain things are premium and standard. So yeah, I think if you think that might be helpful, especially to you all and to your clients, I'll keep pushing so that we can get that out. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question.
In terms of this comparison between standard and premium connectors, at least from my end, our internal narrative is that the standard connectors are to extend productivity scenarios within Office 365. That's why there was that change 2 years ago to promote the Azure connectors to a premium tier because it's for more enterprise scenarios. My complaint is there any plans to turn the Word for Business connector into a standard connector instead of a premium one?
Yeah, I've seen that feedback before as well. I think once things go premium, they don't go back, is what I'm going to say.
That's a tough one to explain. The Word for Business is
Right. Yeah, no, I understand. I totally understand you.
Yeah, but Microsoft Word, the productivity, Office 365 bundle, Excel is a standard connector, and the justification I received is because it's the only connector that wasn't premium that could convert Word documents into PDFs.
Yeah.
And that was a very particular utility which made that connector premium, the ability to convert Word documents into PDFs, and all the other connectors that did that were
See. Okay. See, you know more about this than I do.
no.
I don't usually.
Yeah, but those, can we understand that which are enterprise applications or solutions? Word is a productivity application, and even comparing to the other Office 365 applications, all the other connectors from Office 365 are standard. That was my only thing.
Yeah, I think my homework is to go back and figure out what the licensing definition is. And so at least we could be transparent, right? Because I'm not going to sit here and guess. I don't know. I mean, you made a really good guess about like, okay, it was because of the PDF situation. If that's what you've been told, right? But yeah, I think it's homework for me to go push so that we can bring clarity, right? So we don't have to have these debates anymore. And guesses. A good conversation.
Pronto, pessoal. Vamos fechar agora o Meetup. Natalie, thank you very much for coming. This was an awesome session. Thank you very much once again. Agradecer também a todo o pessoal que esteve aqui no escritório da DevScope, o pessoal que esteve online. Se quiserem deixar feedback sobre a sessão, tem aqui o link. Deixem o vosso like, como diz o pessoal do YouTube. Portanto, e estamos aqui à espera para vocês para a próxima sessão. Obrigado a todos. Tchau.